Where did tens of millions of Pentagon dollars go? Down the drain. The United States Army officially surrendered. They abandoned the replacement program, and the 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun from World War I kept its crown. The military establishment expected a revolution in firepower. Instead, they got a masterclass in humiliation. The budgets to find a replacement easily exceeded the cost of developing some modern guided missiles. Engineers drafted blueprints. Generals demanded results. But the most technological army on the planet faced total impotence. They could not beat a heavy block of steel designed over a century ago. Project after project went straight into the trash. The Pentagon swallowed its pride. The search ended. Today, the military mounts this exact century-old weapon directly onto its newest digital combat platforms. 95% of the blinding muzzle flash vanishes. To keep this century-old design lethal today, engineers pulled the shooter off the exposed roof and locked them behind thick armor. A soft click of a plastic joystick now commands the brutal iron. The animal fear is gone. Precision machining wiped out the deadly manual adjustments. Soldiers no longer gamble their faces every time a red-hot barrel needs swapping. The gun connects directly to the CROWS system, a digital shield. The military pays over $200,000 per unit just to keep the shooter alive. The operator sits deep inside the hull. They watch a glowing screen. They breathe filtered air. John Browning forged this weapon for open trenches. Now his creation rides on laser rangefinders and gyro stabilizers. A thermal imager cuts through the pitch-black night, aiming the machine gun at a target right on the move. Safe digital screens arrived only in 2010 with the M2A1 modification. Before that, pure terror. Why did swapping a simple machine gun barrel cost shooters their lives for decades? Clearances had to be measured manually under incoming fire. For 80 years, soldiers played Russian roulette with every barrel change. The deadly flaw was born in the 1930s. John Browning and Fred Moore Green designed a masterpiece. But mass production failed to machine parts perfectly. Every receiver and barrel fit differently. The gap between the firing pin and the cartridge base dictated everything. This was headspace. Too tight, the gun jammed. Too loose, disaster struck. The bolt also had to lock precisely before the pin dropped. To bypass factory errors, Browning made both mechanisms adjustable. The gunner became a mechanic, right in the trenches. 500 rounds per minute turn steel into a furnace. The barrel glows red. Searing heat radiates directly into the soldier's face. Burning air chokes the lungs, but the battle does not pause. The gunner violently unscrews the white-hot metal. He grabs a fresh barrel. His hands tremble. He inserts tiny metal gauges into the dark receiver. He blindly measures the microscopic gap. Fractions of a millimeter dictate survival. While engineers developed night vision and advanced laser optics, soldiers still manually tuned a century-old mechanism with tiny metal tools. 4 generations of infantry weapons came and went. Yet gunners kept risking their lives over this archaic puzzle. During an ambush, there was zero time for tools. Soldiers guessed. They prayed the old settings fit the new barrel. The gunner locked the heavy bolt. He squinted tightly before the first shot. He pressed the trigger. If he guessed right, the weapon roared. If the timing failed, the round detonated right inside the open chamber. High-pressure gas ripped through the metal. Shrapnel shredded the air. The breech exploded in his face. Halfcock locked the heavy barrel rigid on the steel tripod. He pressed his eye to the 8-power scope. He hunted for a lone target in the dense green foliage. For decades, engineers struggled with this dangerous iron block. But in the jungles of Vietnam, one sniper proved this stubborn machine could do the unthinkable. He stripped the weapon of its chaotic automatic fire. He turned a clumsy suppression beast into a precision tool. He waited alone at the hilltop firebase. Total isolation. Finally, a target emerged from the brush. A Viet Cong fighter pushed a bicycle. He carried an AK-47 rifle. The distance was extreme. 2,280 meters. The sniper exhaled. He smoothly squeezed the butterfly trigger for a single shot. A deafening metallic roar shattered the jungle silence. At 2,280 meters, the 45-gram bullet flies for more than 3 seconds. The victim had zero chance to hear the blast before the impact. One man tamed a lethal, unpredictable weapon through pure human mastery. His cold calculation later inspired Ronnie Barrett to design the famous 50 BMG anti-materiel rifles. Hathcock set an impossible benchmark. The incredible record stood untouched for 35 years. A Canadian sniper finally surpassed that distance in the mountains of Afghanistan. He broke the long-standing record in 2002. What happens when a supply column faces daily slaughter in the Vietnam War? You stop waiting for miracles. You start welding. Precision sniper shots were a rare luxury. For the desperate drivers of the Transportation Corps, this ancient heavy machine gun remained their only mass shield against constant ambushes. Thin cargo beds offered zero protection. The new M60 machine gun was light and fast, but it lacked the brutal punch to shred dense jungle. So the men improvised. Blinding sparks from makeshift welding illuminated the motor pools every night. Soldiers hastily torched heavy steel plates straight onto the flimsy sides of standard cargo trucks. They built rolling fortresses. Then came the crowning detail. Mechanics dragged out obsolete quad mounts straight from World War II. 4 heavy barrels locked into a single anti-aircraft turret. They dropped these massive steel relics right into the reinforced truck beds. A desperate clash of eras. In the chaotic maze of the jungle, advanced military theory fell apart. New developments meant nothing. Raw firepower dictated survival. Enemy fighters triggered a roadside trap. The tree line erupted. The lead gun truck instantly leveled the greenery with a solid wall of lead. It shredded the hidden attackers before they could even turn to run. Where did its wartime dominance go? It shattered against jet speeds. In 1972, a B-52 Stratofortress tailgunner tracked a MiG-21. He fired. 700 bullets flew out. The enemy plane exploded. The bomber hull vibrated. The roar deafened him. The barrels spat 1,000 rounds per minute. Desperation drove the shooter. This was the final chord. The weapon died. Years earlier, the gun suffered humiliating failures. Korea exposed the truth. Soviet MiG-15 fighters appeared. They exceeded 1,000 kilometers per hour. Time vanished. Gunners had fractions of a second. Reflexes failed. Jets took over. The heavy guns stayed on the ground. Engineers replaced the obsolete aviation mounts with the devastating firepower of 20mm M61 Vulcan rotary cannons. A weapon forged to annihilate heavy enemy machines ultimately transformed the infantryman's life into a crushing logistical nightmare. Millions of barrels plummeted from the sky alongside shattered aircraft, transferring an immense physical burden to the ground. A single belt of 100 cartridges weighed 11 kilograms. That heavy brass and steel bit relentlessly into a tired soldier's bruised shoulder. This agonizing load bought the gunner exactly 10 seconds of continuous fire. Feeding that fleeting burst required a relentless stream of specialized ammunition. The standard solid bullet easily shattered human bone, but the sky demanded far more terrifying chemistry. Ground crews linked belts with an intricate cocktail of armor-piercing cores, glowing chemical tracers, and incendiary compounds meant to ignite aviation fuel. Fighter pilots relied on this deadly mixture to track elusive targets while simultaneously tearing through hardened cockpits. To sustain this endless hunger for destruction, American factories worked without a single pause. They flooded muddy trenches and burning skies with heavy metal, stamping out nearly 2 million machine guns before the fighting ended. Yet the vast majority of this staggering arsenal never saw the dirt. The assembly lines ultimately manufactured precisely 1.6 million aviation versions. How did American convoys avoid ambushes? They simply erased suspicious thickets with lead before the battle even began. These exact armor-piercing rounds turned the M45 anti-aircraft mount into a tool of total fear for ground troops. The Luftwaffe vanished from the skies by late 1944. Gunners lowered their sights. The M45 Maxim motorized turret whirred. 4 heavy barrels swung toward the tree line. They spit flame simultaneously. 2,000 rounds per minute tore through the branches. In mere seconds, an abandoned truck dissolved into a smoking sieve. The dull crack of splintered wood and ruptured earth filled the air. 4 M45 barrels unleashed such a dense lead barrage that taking cover in a forest strip became physically impossible. Infantrymen called it the meat chopper. Soldiers adopted a brutal new tactic. They called it reconnaissance by fire. Convoys no longer waited for the enemy to strike. Crews on M3 half-tracks aimed their weapons at every trench, every bunker, and every dark bush along the road. They squeezed the trigger just in case. A standard .30 caliber bullet stopped at the first sandbag. The .50 caliber punched through dirt, timber, and human flesh without slowing down. Safe cover ceased to exist. There was nowhere to hide. Long before the meat choppers arrived, Sherman tank crews realized a brutal truth. A heavy barrel on the roof completely changed the rules of combat. Now, a German machine gunner pressed his face into the trench dirt. He listened. His stone barricade methodically crumbled into dust. At first, American tankers aimed high. They targeted dive bombers. Then they leveled the muzzles. The massive rounds chewed through the battlefield. Sandbags ruptured. Brick walls collapsed. Repeated bursts easily pierced the 30mm side armor of Panzer IV tanks. The Germans returned fire. They deployed their MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns. Their tripods featured complex recoil springs and precise optics. It meant nothing. Distances over 1,800 meters meant the American shooter could methodically destroy enemy positions. He remained entirely out of reach of return fire. He just held the trigger down. 1,800 meters. At that distance, German machine guns became useless pieces of metal. The barrage tore right through the earth. German infantry broke and abandoned their pierced shelters in blind panic. How do you suppress the defenses of an entire warship? You build a flying monster. This total ground domination grew from a desperate need to protect the sky on December 7, 1941. The horizon simply tore open. American sailors over Pearl Harbor grabbed their deck mounts, firing frantic bursts at incoming Japanese dive bombers. Aviation quickly became the primary domain for these heavy weapons. Crews managed dozens of barrels. Fighter pilots in the P-47 Thunderbolt relied on 8 synchronized guns to rip enemy interceptors apart. Deep inside the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress, teenage gunners froze in unheated glass turrets. At -40 degrees Celsius, their stiff fingers fought the triggers, praying the cold metal would not jam. Technicians maniacally crammed 18 heavy barrels into every available space of the B-25 bomber fuselage. The aircraft plummeted toward a Japanese destroyer, vibrating wildly as the pilot unleashed hell. 18 synchronized barrels opened fire at once, generating an output of 14,000 rounds per minute. Acrid smoke from the burnt powder instantly flooded the cockpit, choking the crew during the steep dive. This monstrous density of fire chewed effortlessly through solid naval steel, leaving the sailors zero chance to hide. The plane swept past. The blast threw shattered anti-aircraft gunners directly into the cold ocean waves. One low pass erased the entire anti-aircraft defense of a ship. How do you drag a heavenly weapon down into the infantry mud? You add mass. World War II forged the M2 into an invincible legend. But its journey into the trenches began with a painful realization. The blistering aviation machine gun simply melted on the earth. Up in the clouds, the thin barrel survived. Freezing winds cooled the steel during short aerial bursts. Down in the dirt, everything changed. Firing without the freezing slipstream turned the thin metal red hot. The bitter smell of glowing, melting steel choked the infantrymen in their foxholes. The barrel warped, the gun jammed, the weapon died. In the sky, the weapon fired at a terrifying pace, 850 rounds per minute, an unattainable luxury for ground troops. The infantry needed a gun that would not liquefy during a desperate firefight. Engineers chose a brutal compromise. They thickened the steel. They gave the barrel enough dense mass to absorb the agonizing heat. This massive modification became known as the M2HB heavy barrel. It dragged the gun out of the sky and chained it to the mud. The infantry bought their survival with sweat and agony. It was a crushing physical burden. The new design was 18 kilograms lighter than the obsolete water-cooled version, but it still broke the backs of the men hauling it across the battlefield. The bare weapon alone weighed 38 kilograms. Dr. Samuel Green sat over another man's blueprints, desperately trying to assemble a universal weapon from the heavy wreckage of the past. That massive barrel would have remained an isolated experiment if Green had not taken these unfinished sketches into his own hands. John Browning suffered a fatal heart failure in 1926, leaving behind a flawed prototype. The old concept was dead. The crushing pressure consumed him. He had to salvage a doomed project before the military high command canceled it forever. Green locked himself in the workshop and maniacally started cutting apart the original designs. The engineer realized the Army did not need just one heavy gun, but rather a flexible platform adapting to any battlefield scenario. He manually rearranged the internal steel components of the receiver. Now the intricate mechanism accepted ammunition belts from either the left or the right side. A sharp metallic click echoed through the testing room as he locked a fresh barrel into the universal receiver box. This single engineering breakthrough allowed mechanics to swap jackets and barrels directly on the front lines. His unified core receiver saved the military millions of dollars and countless hours of frantic logistics. His relentless work transformed one rigid failure into a lethal family of 7 different weapon variants using the exact same base. Troops could configure the hardware for water-cooled defensive lines, air-cooled infantry positions, or flexible mounts inside tight bomber turrets. The military officially designated this adaptable system as the M2 Browning. He saved the gun. Dr. Green firmly stamped his approval on the final universal design. Why build a machine gun the weight of a grown man? Out of sheer desperation. Dr. Samuel Green did not inherit a flawless masterpiece. He took over a clumsy, waterlogged monster that eventually dragged John Moses Browning to his grave in 1926. Engineers had scaled up the proven M1917 machine gun. They worked frantically for months to unleash this steel beast. But on the exact day Browning finally demonstrated his working prototype, the guns fell silent. The Great War ended. They had to tame the new 50 BMG cartridge, 12.7 by 99 millimeters of raw destruction. It packed 4 times the energy of standard infantry rifles. Brass casings shattered, steel parts warped. The savage recoil threatened to tear the receiver apart. The military pushed forward anyway. The result emerged as the M1921 prototype, a colossal failure. Officers gathered around the bulky tripod. Inside the massive brass cooling jacket, water sloshed with a dull, heavy splash. The weapon stood completely immobile. The total setup weighed 54 kilograms. That is the exact weight of an adult human. Generals expected exhausted, mud-soaked infantrymen to haul this dead weight across shattered trenches. It only fired 500 rounds per minute, nothing fancy. It fed exclusively from the left side, making it utterly useless for the cramped cockpits of early aircraft or tanks. The Navy bought a few for ship defense. That barely kept the project breathing. The heavy weapon became an anchor. It drained the legendary inventor's final years in Belgium. His heart simply gave out. John Moses Browning died. Where did the demand for this lethal caliber actually originate? From the bloody mud of the trenches. The heavy, water-cooled monster that eventually killed John Moses Browning was born from pure fear. General John Pershing saw the first tanks on the Western Front. He panicked. Steel beasts crawled through the morning fog. For the first time in human conflict, infantrymen experienced complete psychological shock. They fired their weapons frantically. Standard rifle bullets struck the advancing armor. They sparked in the gray light. They bounced off the metal hulls with a sickening, high-pitched ring. Tanks simply crushed the defensive lines alive. The American military lacked any weapon to bridge the massive gap between standard infantry rifles and heavy field artillery. Pershing issued an emergency order. he demanded an impossible weapon. The projectile had to travel at 823 meters per second. It had to punch straight through thick armor plates. Engineers scrambled in the dark. Then they found a shortcut. A captured German 13x92mm cartridge sat heavy on the design table, a thick brass cylinder built for raw destruction. It represented the first dedicated anti-tank ammunition ever fired in combat. The panicked American team studied the enemy prize. They copied the proportions. They used the German geometry to aggressively scale up their own ammunition. The desperate trench order birthed the 50 BMG, a legendary cartridge measuring exactly 12.7 by 99 millimeters.